If they're armed with all the information available in today's technology age, why do so many forecasters get it wrong predicting the property market? That's one of the three things I'm going to discuss with you in today's show. I'm also going to show you some latest statistics that explain a segment of the property market you really must avoid. It just doesn't work despite what many people tell you. And in my mindset moment today, I'm going to not talk about how to become successful. I'm going to actually suggest you embrace failure. Why? Well, listen to this week's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast and you'll find out. So welcome to another show.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's most trusted property commentator, who has once again been voted our leading expert in wealth creation. That's the fifth time he's won a similar award in the last 7 years.
You've heard me say it before, but now the statistics prove my point. Off-the-plan apartments make terrible investments. Recently, analysis by BIS Oxford Economics reports that of the apartments sold off the plan during the past 8 years, 2 out of 3 Melbourne apartments have made no price gains or have lost money on resale. Now, this is despite magnificent immigration in Victoria and a significant property boom. In Brisbane, about half the apartments bought off the plan have been selling at a loss or at no profit, and in Sydney it's about 1 in 4 apartments bought since 2015 that are selling at a loss or no profit today. In other words, more investors in off-the-plan high-rise apartments lost money than have made money. Now, of course, there's lots of other investors who are sitting on their apartments but are continuing to lose value as the properties fall in value, and they haven't crystallised their losses yet. The Australian Bureau of Statistics show that in 2018, last year, 98,000 apartments were completed across the country. Interestingly, 65,000 of those were in New South Wales alone. And the situation is likely to worsen considering the pipeline of apartments still to be completed. So according to BIS research, resale of apartments within a 3 to 5 kilometre range of the central CBDs of Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane realised consistently lower prices than established apartment resales. So let's make it clear, we're talking about those new high-rise apartments in the towers, not what, when I grew up, that used to be called flats, and I still sometimes call them flats to distinguish. So they're the older 2- and 3-storey walk-up apartments built in good locations, built solidly, built with big floor plans, built with balconies. So flats, the older apartments, established apartments, have done better than the new apartments. But to make things worse, today with falling property values, a large proportion of those people who bought off the plan apartments are now finding that on completion they're valuing in at less than their contract price. But at the same time, nervous banks are demanding bigger deposits from these purchasers. What this means is this double whammy is going to result in more off-the-plan investors having difficulty settling their purchases, leading to rising defaults because they can't settle, and major discounting by investors who do settle have just got to get out, or trying to get out before they settle, or developers trying to move more of their stock. According to research house Riskwise, Brisbane inner-city apartment market has now got about 10,000 more homes in the pipeline than there should be, suggesting that Brisbane in particular is going to face more defaults on settlements. But that's not the end of it. There are long-term problems as well. If you're a visitor a decade ago and came back to Australia today, you wouldn't recognise our landscape. The spread of high-rise apartments in the CBD, in the suburbs surrounding the CBD, as well as the outlying suburbs, have changed our landscape remarkably. But many of these new tiny apartments, compared to the older established flats, many of these tiny ones, the ones that are built over the last building boom, they're unlikely to meet the requirements of the Gen Ys as they grow older. Sure, more and more of us want to live in apartments. Sure, more of us are trading space, big backyards and front yards, for place being in the right location. More of us are wanting to live in apartments and trading backyards for balconies or courtyards. But not for apartments that are so small and ones that lack amenity. The other looming problem is poor construction techniques. I used to jokingly say the apartments today are being built out of paper mache, and then all of a sudden there was those high-profile structural problems in the Opal Tower. But that's actually likely to be one of many, many stories in the future. These stories about inflammable cladding that's going to devalue many apartment buildings. But there's an even bigger risk for off-the-plan apartments with the proposed changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax if Labor wins government. The concern, of course, is that the removal of negative gearing benefits from established dwellings and quarantining it to only new dwellings is going to force more investors, inexperienced investors, uninformed, uneducated investors, to buy these sort of properties, which don't make and haven't made good investments for a long, long time. It's only going to create more problems when there's going to be resales, as eventually there will be, because now they're not going to be new dwellings, and so therefore they're not going to benefit from the tax benefits of capital gains tax exemption and negative gearing. So, in my mind, there's no doubt about it at all. You really, really have to steer clear of off-the-plan property purchases. I can understand why some people think it's a good idea that I can put some money down now and then I don't have to settle for a couple of years, and in the meantime it's going to go up. So people who haven't got enough money try and get into the market doing it this way. It doesn't work, and particularly in the current property markets. So if somebody's trying to sell you an off-the-plan apartment based on tax benefits and depreciation benefits and capital gains tax benefits, run as fast as you can. In a moment, in my mindset message, I'm going to share with you why you should embrace failure. Now, this podcast is all about becoming more successful, so why would I talk about failure? Hang around, I'll explain why, and you'll soon see. I'm also going to share with you one of the big things that confounds economists, why they can't get their predictions right, but maybe at the end of this show, you'll understand a bit more about it and you'll be better at understanding one of the major drivers of the property cycle. But before we get on to that, I just want to remind you that if you're wanting to take your property investing to the next level, if you're keen to take advantage of the opportunities the current market's offering, why not get the team at Metropole, my team at Metropole, that's won multiple awards on your side. Now, you probably know we're Australia's largest buyers agents. You probably know we've got our own teams on the ground in Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane, which means that we don't just fly in and fly out. We know those markets backwards. And you probably know that we don't sell properties, never have, so therefore we're on your side representing you. You may not recognise that how we start the journey with clients is with us building a strategic portfolio plan for them. So a lot of home buyers just go off and we'll help them buy a home. But if you're going to become a property investor, wouldn't it make sense to have clarity about what's possible? Wouldn't it be useful to understand what's realistic? Think about it. If all that us building you a property plan would do will show you the type of properties you need and how much cash flow you need to achieve your financial goals, the ones you want to get, wouldn't that be worthwhile? Wouldn't it be worthwhile if we could explain to you the next steps and your likely timeline? I think that would be a big help. So why not get the team at Metropole on your side, metropole.com.au, and allow us to build you a strategic portfolio plan so that you can understand what you should do next. And if you've already got a property portfolio, one of the things we do is give you a independent, unbiased opinion of how it's going and where it's going to get you, if it's going to get you where you want to go. Metropole.com.au. By the way, we've got no properties for sale, but we help our clients grow, protect and pass on their wealth by giving independent advice.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In today's mindset moment, I'm going to suggest you should consider embracing failure. Now, before you think what's Michael on, let me explain. Because everywhere you look, people's achievements are being celebrated, whether it's in the papers, amongst our family, friends, on social media, and why not? Success is a wonderful thing and it's worthy of celebration. But so is failure. Now, hear me out on this one. Failure gets a bad rap and most of us go to great lengths to avoid messing up. But here's the thing. We're all going to fail at some point, whether it's a succession of small errors or one monumental disaster. And the sooner we embrace failure as inevitable, and the sooner we arm ourselves with a few tricks to handle it, the better off we're going to be. So I'd like to just quickly share with you 4 good reasons to celebrate failure. First of all, number one is it builds resistance. Talent's an important component of success, but it's not the only one, not by a long shot. Hard work's also extremely important, as is discipline and focus. But I'd also put resilience high up amongst the most important predictors of success. Many would be business people, many would be investors, entrepreneurs. They've dreamt of financial freedom and they start their journey by reading all the right books, by researching the market, by lining up all their financial ducks in a row. And then they hit a hurdle. Cash flow tightens, business turns down, they miss out on a property deal, the credit squeeze happens and they can't get into the property market. It just all gets too hard and they give up. Resilient types know how to take these setbacks in their stride. Most often, this resilience it's been built up from a young age where their parents taught them how to fail and pick themselves up again. If you were a child who dealt well with failure, you're most likely going to also be an adult with internal reserves to handle setbacks. Tip number 2, reason number 2 that we should be happy with failure is it makes us more human. It makes us more likeable. Now that's interesting, isn't it? But according to psychologists, this is called the pratfall effect, where someone we perceive as competent makes a mistake, and then we often like that person more because it shows they're human too. Being vulnerable, at times, failing or asking for help is a necessary part of life, and it helps us build better bonds with others. So when we fail and we need others' help, we're able to cement relationships with family, with friends, with community that sometimes we didn't realise were even there. I've found failure can open the door to better relationships with those around us because nothing puts things in perspective or keeps our egos in check, quite like a run of bad luck. The third reason you should consider being happy when you're failed is it makes us better at what we do. Over the years, I've seen many people fail with their investments or in businesses or in relationships, in multiple areas of their lives, only to return, to get up one more time and to become really successful at the game. When we fail, it gives us a chance to reflect on what worked, what didn't work, what went wrong, so we don't make the mistakes again. We learn, we adapt, and hopefully we grow from that failure. It's amazing how many of us are afraid of failing when it's really one of the best ways to learn. In fact, you've probably heard me say on this podcast, I'm a real success at failure. And the fourth reason to embrace failure is we tend to ask more questions. Whether you choose to own up to your failures or hide from them, they're a part of life. So if you learn to accept the possibility of failure and not be so terrified of saying the wrong thing or messing up, then you're going to end up a lot bolder. This means you're going to be able to ask questions without being afraid of looking stupid. You're going to take calculated risks without being overwhelmed by the fear. You're not be concerned of what other people are going to think. You're not going to pay attention to other people. You're going to listen to your gut. And if you do, you're much more likely to become truly successful. If they're armed with all the research available in today's information age, why can't economists agree on where our property market's heading? In fact, I think a better question would be, why do so many get it wrong? And the simple answer is that market movements are far from an exact science. Now, the fundamentals are easy to monitor, things like population growth, supply and demand, employment levels, interest rates, affordability, inflation pressures, things like that. However, there's one overriding factor that experts have real difficulty quantifying, and that is investor sentiment. And that's what's really behind market movements of late. That's what's currently one of the factors making our markets so low at the moment. I found investors often suffer from what I call lapses of logic when investing, and many of their investment decisions are driven by emotion. For example, we tend to extrapolate the present into the future. In other words, when things are booming, we tend to think that good times are never going to end, and when the market mood is glum, we've got difficulty seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Think about it. When the media is reporting that property prices are falling and there's an impending house crash and 60 Minutes comes out and tells us property value is going to fall 40%, many investors get scared off and they sit on the sidelines. They think the end of property is nigh and they think things are never going to improve, when in reality, much of the risk's already been removed from the market. Conversely, when the property markets are booming and stories of the investors seemingly making huge gains overnight abound, people want to jump into the property market. They want to hop on the bandwagon. They want to cash in, often at a time when the property market's near its peak. There are other emotional traps, other psychological tricks that our mind plays on us. Things like getting overconfident, things like wishful thinking, things like ignoring information that conflicts with our current views. That's called confirmation bias, and in that way, investors create their own reality. So confirmation bias is when you keep looking for things to confirm your already preconceived idea of what's going on. You see, it's easier for it's easier for your mind that tries to trick you a bit. It's easy to put another piece into the puzzle of the picture you've already got, rather than start building a brand new picture. And of course, Google makes things worse also. You go down that rabbit warren, you start looking for something and you'll find other articles that similarly confirm your current biases. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that investor psychology drives booms and busts. I hope you can start to see how the dominant investor mentality of the day helps drive our property cycles. And the media makes it worse, of course, by feeding it. Now, just to make things clear, home buyers make up about 70% of property transactions in our market, so they drive our property markets. But it's investors, it's investor activity that creates our booms when we overshoot the market and our busts. Simply, looking back a few years ago, there was investors having a feeding frenzy because of the fear of missing out. It drove many people into the Sydney and Melbourne property markets and drove them to dizzying heights. But now that investors have put the brakes on, they're not buying properties as much. They're sitting by the sidelines. Property values are falling. Now, there's other reasons as well. But of course, in due course, they're all going to jump back into the market again. Demand will rise, and so will property values. Now, obviously, one or two misguided investors aren't going to be able to influence property prices. But the problem is investor psychology is infectious. People tend to want to do what others are doing. We follow the herd, because going against popular opinion is often perceived as risky. What if I make a mistake? What if the crowd's right and I'm wrong? This stems way back actually to our forefathers, our ancestors, when it was safer to remain as part of the herd rather than leave the security of the pack and get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. So we like to be herd animals. But this herd behaviour is currently in this society being magnified by several things, including mass communication. And that allows behaviour to become infectious. Now more than ever, we're bombarded with messages from the media that includes how we think, how we feel, what's going on. When we hear that the real estate is doomed, all but a handful of sophisticated investors get scared and they get out of the market. And when the media tells us the housing markets are booming, everyone wants a piece of the action, don't they? So ways that the media, the current world, is forcing us to be part of the herd mentality includes mass communication and the pressure to conform. For example, if your friends and family are doing it, must be right? Well, probably not. But human nature makes us reluctant to do the opposite of what our peers are doing. Sometimes there's a precipitating event. Sometimes there's something to set things off, like the global financial crisis saw a wave of investors scared out of the property market, or the resources boom afterwards saw the opposite. A whole lot of investors get back into the market. And there was 60 Minutes last year that got a lot of publicity and clearly turned market sentiment in October last year when that show came out telling us that property values were going to drop 40%. And then there's a general belief that grows and spreads. When the belief that property values can only go one way, they can only go up, that suddenly spreads, and there's a whole group of new uneducated investors, a whole new generation of investors entering the market pushing up property values. And they perpetuate the belief, and they help make it a reality. Similarly, when the herd believes the market's going to crash, they steer clear, and this gets reported in the media, and the negative sentiment feeds on itself. So these lapses in logic by an individual investor and then by a group of investors gets magnified by this crowd psychology, and it feeds the property cycle and goes a long way to explaining why we're currently experiencing a property slump when the underlying property fundamentals are pretty sound. As I said, when investor sentiment is positive, the crowd jumps in feet first, pushes up demand, pushes pressures up on prices, and causes booms. Conversely, just like now, when sentiment's negative, the crowd backs off, many are selling out, and the game goes on as more lose out, eventually causing the sort of market slump we're experiencing. So what can you as a property investor learn from this? Firstly, that our property markets aren't only driven by fundamentals, but also by often irrational and erratic behaviour of an unstable crowd of investors. Number two, you should remember that booms never last forever, but neither do busts. So don't be surprised when they come around, and don't overreact. This is going to stop you getting sucked into the booms and spat out by the busts. The third lesson to learn from this is treat your property investments like a business and stick to a proven strategy, because if you've got a system, if you've got a strategy, and if you've got mentors around you to help you, that's going to take the emotion out of your decisions. And the fourth thing I'd like you to recognise is that residential real estate's a long-term play. So be prepared for the ups and downs and set yourself up with financial buffers to help you through the property cycles. I think another lesson should be to consider investing counter-cyclically. World-renowned investor Warren Buffett once said, "We simply attempt to be fearful when others are greedy and to be greedy when others are fearful." And I know this is the investment strategy of many successful property investors. I've always been an advocate of counter-cyclical investing. Now, you can't always do it because you're not going to, during boom times, you're not going to miss out on those either. But if you can get in when others are being fearful, when you're moving against the crowd, I've noticed that produces the best results and can mean the difference between outstanding gains in your property markets and average ones. Now, sure, it takes courage to do the opposite of what everyone else is doing, but the result of your contrary behaviour will ultimately speak for itself. Well, as we get to the end of this week's show, I hope you're finishing off a little bit wiser than you started. But because there's so much information to give you and the markets are changing so fast, I'm now bringing you these podcasts twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. On Thursdays, we mix it up a bit with the Rich Habits, Poor Habits podcast and Dr. Andrew Wilson as my guest in Property Insiders. But if you're getting benefit from it, why not pass the message forward? Just like I'm trying to help others, I'm wanting more of us to become financially independent, free, and not make the mistakes that so many investors make. Why don't you pass the message on to somebody, tell them about it, and if you're really enjoying it, leave me a review, like Stephen CC3 did. He left a 5-star review. Of course, when you leave a review, if I read it out, I'm going to give you a copy of one of my books. Just email me, michael@metropole.com.au. And Stephen said, "Thank you for the great tips on the various risks in investing. It once again reminded me that risk is not knowing what you're doing. Investors need to continuously educate themselves so they're well informed and able to make good decisions." Well, thank you very much for that smart message, Stephen. I look forward to being back with you again. As I said, we're doing this twice a week now. Catch up with you real soon.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect and pass on their wealth through strategic property advice. If you got value from today's show, we'd really appreciate it if you would leave a review and we'll read it out on a future show, and Michael will gift you one of his books as a way of saying thank you. Just go to michaelyardneypodcast.com/review and let us know what you think. If you don't already subscribe, head over to iTunes or your favourite Android app. You'll find us there as Michael Yardney Podcast. If you'd like to gain instant access to the show notes, head across to michaelyardneypodcast.com. Watch out for our show next week. You'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes.